Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the People and Dancefloors podcast. It has been a while. It's been quite a while, actually. And that's because we've been busy, very busy with doing some research in Malta. And today I am really excited and lucky to be joined by a group of people who are Maltese, as well as being heavily enmeshed in the scene in different ways. But firstly, I'd like to introduce my research and partner in crime in Malta, Karen Mamo. Welcome, Karen, and thank you for joining us. Maybe you want to say a couple of words about yourself, Karen.
Hi, Julia, and thank you for giving me the floor and introducing me a little bit. Yes, I am your partner in crime in Malta, and it's very exciting that finally a study is looking at dance floors and people who frequent these places in a neutral and including also the positive aspects of dance floors and substance use, because usually in Malta we only speak about the negative aspects of substance use and nightlife. So this balances a bit the reality and provides a better picture of why people use drugs and go out at night.
Indeed. It is really important to talk about the nuances and the positives as well. And I guess today we'll touch upon that as well as other things. But first, I want to introduce the other panelists. I'm going to go with Tina first.
Hey, Anne, thank you for having us here. Like you said, I'm Tina. I'm a mixed media artist. Studied in fine arts, but I've been finding my way in the music world slowly but surely, I hope, for the past 6 years now. I've been DJing for around 5 years now, and also practicing within the arts and sound. So apart from that, I've also been an avid club goer, involved in different organizations which relate to electronic music in Malta, and always intrigued in all the different sides of the dance floor, not just being within the dance floor or DJing for it, but also the community that grows around it. And I'm currently finishing up a master's, also kind of looking into certain aspects of music and the arts and communities. So that's me. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tina. It's much. You've done a much better job at introducing yourself than I would have done. So I'm glad you were able to encapsulate a lot of things. And I like the fact that you talked about community alongside all of the different things that you do in relation to like DJing and sound and art. So I think maybe hopefully other people will feel like that the community aspect of all this is very important. Yeah. What about you, Mark? Tell me about yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Mark. Thank you for inviting me for this opportunity as well. I'm a graphic designer and illustrator by profession. Currently co-founder of Unmute Malta, which is a streaming online streaming sessions on YouTube and Facebook. Plus, I had the experiences in creating events in the past as well. Been clubbing since over 25 years now. That's basically it. I'm an avid techno music lover, as everyone knows me here. So I'm more on the event side than the music side. But
Well, but being an avid music lover already puts you on the music side, even though you're like, you're doing the kind of events and organization and
yeah,
so on,
I'm
right?
always at the back. I'm a background.
You're the like puppeteer who makes things happen.
I
Thank you
prefer.
so much, Mark. I'm gonna go with Edwin next.
Hi, I'm Edwin. I've been involved in electronic music for the past 30 odd years. So I saw the scene, let's say, get the scene get sort of evolving from nothing, sort of being given birth, sort of. um, I've been producing electronic music for 30 years, but then I was involved in the very first events in Malta as an artist, and my day job was at the bank. So I slowly rose in the ranks of a major local bank. And I used to also get some sort of how do you say expressions when they would tell me, listen, you've played at that rave yesterday, and but still, notwithstanding, I managed to make my way up, trying to break these taboos about the scene. A couple of years ago, we had the opportunity also to be one of the founders of Electronic Music Malta, and one of the main objectives of Electronic Music Malta is to remove that stigma that's associated with electronic music in general.
Don't we like to hear that? Anything that removes the stigma around the scene is got to be a good thing.
Right.
And yeah, I think it's fantastic to have you. Thanks to Edwin. And last but not least, Neil.
Hey everyone, I'm Neil. I'm 31 years old. I'm a Malta-based producer. I make music under the names Acidulant and Collateral Intelligence. I was basically involved with music and with clubbing from a very early age. Basically, I was 15 years old the first time I played in a club. As well, I was highly influenced by my uncle, who was sort of one of the very few promoters here in Malta that began the underground scene, let's say. Um, like Edwin said, I'm as well a co-founder of Electronic Music Malta. And like as well Tina said, my priority, apart from doing and recording music, is as well to help the community and spread not only the knowledge, but trying to break the stigma as well about the taboos and all the stuff that's around electronic music and its followers, basically.
That's fantastic.
Apart from that, I actually am like juggle around between aviation and music. I'm an ex-commercial pilot as well, so it was even more difficult for me telling people I'm an underground techno producer and then having to go fly commercial planes. So that stigma, this is where the courage with Edwin and the stuff came through for us to start this organization and to even break the stigma, hopefully once and for all.
That's so interesting because like so many people who are fully dedicated to the scene and the community also have day jobs and professional lives as well. So it's like it's a big ask that because you can't a lot of people can't survive solely from their involvement in the scene, even though they are working, they're producing, making music, running events and so on. They also have to have jobs in order to in order to survive. So it shows that how much dedication and passion people have for the scene to be able to do that on top of like a day job basically. So I'm so impressed with everyone about that, really. Anyway, now that we've done introductions, we can move on to the more juicy stuff. It's been juicy, but we can have the more juicy stuff of discussing that kind of stigma, really. That we're going to start with a stigma. So, in terms of the relationship between substance use and the dance floor, and or substance use on the dance floor, and the kind of social perceptions, the mainstream social perceptions that exist about it in the Maltese context. There's probably, I'd say, a lot of the stigma comes from people assuming that it's like a kind of youthful, hedonistic pursuit. It has to do with pleasure and fun alone, and doesn't really necessarily have any kind of solid, important foundation or basis for people, in people's lives. It's just a kind of silly, fickle thing, right? And especially the fact that substance use is involved, and illicit substance use, not just alcohol use, a lot of people frown upon the activity. They think it's like, bad and silly and fickle and so on. So participants to the project, both in Malta and in the UK, have spoken about how difficult it is to broach the subject with family, with other people in their lives, at work. You can't proudly say, I go out clubbing, because people will maybe think differently of you, and they will, have an opinion that's based on maybe those stereotypes that exist in society. So with that in mind, what do you think are some of the biggest barriers to a more open dialogue about substance use in the context of the scene in Malta? And I'm going to start with Tina.
Okay, so I have a few points on this. I would say that unfortunately people who start clubbing, their clubbing career, let's put it like that, go into it sometimes feeling like it's a dirty doing, and that's especially because of, or something that should be hidden, and this is exactly because of what you're saying, it's having quite a stigma. I think especially with regards to substance use, it has a bit of a dark and dingy kind of scenario to it, especially because of the way it's kind of represented locally. So especially when it comes to local media, whenever examples are promoted through TV or radio, there's always that dark and dingy side. So it's nearly a negative propaganda on the scene. Even the kind of images which are used when they're talking about events or things which happen at events, you find these like massive dark heaps of like black backdrops with heaps of different drugs, which make it look like such a scary, and so I think the way certain things are represented as you go off already starts to give them a really bad impression to people. I say this kind of coming from a backdrop with a very close relative being within the kind of substance use, working against substance use, and kind of being in the scenario, people getting off addictions and so on. So I come into the scenario with this state of mind of it being a very dark and dingy thing. But obviously, especially being within the scene and also growing in it, now you start to notice that there are alternative ways as to how it can be marketed, represented, promoted. And that also comes in the way people are educated about it. Obviously, there are certain ages when education can start on these things, but it's not also when it starts, but how it's done. And that covers all different types of substance, including alcohol. There's a difference between it being a massive no thing and it being educated in a certain way where, there's a critical thinking manner to it. And this idea of critical thinking is something which I really feel is lacking. People aren't allowed to think for themselves about this topic in general. They're just brainwashed into having a very closed opinion on it. And another thing, I won't take up much more time, is also what events are actually linked to electronic music. To a certain extent, if it's only this idea of electronic music being performed in dark, dingy clubs, which are very dark, very scary, like this kind of place you wouldn't want your kids to be, then obviously parents are going like, don't go there, please, and are going to be shocked when it happens. But that also, when you start being introduced and you start attending these places, going to different events, noticing that it's not that one-way street, you know. Perceptions can start to change there. You can listen to electronic music outside in the open, okay, in a dark dance floor with very peculiar and very mindfully placed visuals and so on. So it's a very educated thing in reality. So even the place and scenario of where these things happen is a bit of a barrier, I feel.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. I never really thought fully about the kind of visual aspect of it and how the association between dark and dingy and then like the activity also being quite quite dark and scary and so on. But yeah, that's really interesting. What does everybody else think? Please feel free to come in.
Oh, I'll jump in to say that unfortunately, there is an aspect in Malta, and that you hear stories of individuals that today have I would say established themselves even in the industry, that still have a blot in their police conduct because once in a while they were in a roadblock and somehow they had some personal substance on them, and this remained in their police conduct. So this is one thing that has been mentioned even um, uh, nationally in a reform that is being planned. In that, why should an individual who at the age of 16 or 15 was with his friends and happened to have, like, somehow um, being caught with substance which is for personal use, would remain, like stained for entire life in police conduct just because of this singular event, possibly, and this is one of the many aspects that's being mentioned as part of a reform. On the aspect that Tina has mentioned about the venues themselves and the places themselves, as a lot of my colleagues here can say, in Malta, there is no structure in that these venues are not properly licensed, most of them. They aren't properly regulated with the authorities. And part and parcel of a reform that would possibly, tackle this stigma behind substance abuse, and maybe tackle the educational aspect of the substances you're taking and what effect they might have on you, and and educate yourself about what you should take and not take, or maybe whatever aspects about that. The places themselves aren't regulated, so you can imagine most of them aren't regulated. Most of them have operators clubs, and instead are just have a license for a bar. And this came up especially during COVID because of the mess there was with obviously the assistance, the financial assistance that was being given to these places. So so such in Malta, there's still also we are still behind even these places where obviously the framework and structure behind these places, I mean, isn't properly regulated. So can you imagine the provisioning of possibly first aiders or whatever other assistance there might be to tackle it from an open mind perspective rather than from a wrist slapping, I would say, mentality. And the final thing I wanted to say is that we are not the first generation, actually, because I happen to have one of my top managers that was in the movement, I would say, in progressive rock movement of the 70s, and you can imagine what was the typical, I would say, recreational substance that was part of the psychedelic rock movement of the 70s, and they openly speak about those times, and obviously these are highly established, some of them chairmen of entities, some of them. So we aren't, believe it or not, the first generation. We might be the third generation, possibly, of this wave that came part of the electronic music culture, I would say. I was noting in times, I guess recently we launched this project that is mapping the historiography of electronic music in Malta and its culture. It's called Electronica. I don't want to advertise, but it's something that's being also supported as a proper research exercise. And we were analyzing the times when we had massive raves in Malta, when it became like a big wave with like 5,000, 10,000 people in a rave. And for a while, there were unfortunately some overdoses And for a while there started to be a sort of structure of having first aiders, of having water fountains, of having, ambulances, and that seemed to be a move in the right direction, which unfortunately I have to say, and I'll ask my colleagues here and my friends, this seems to have drizzled away. I'm not saying that's this framework. I mean, it's an obligation to have an ambulance, but the element of beefing it up more with education, with pamphlets, with not much on the stigma, but at least one educates, who's participating about some effects, about what, how not to combine things. It's like when you're combining drinks, so as not to fall into the like specifics of what you should not take with what, because otherwise you'll end up, very, very in a bad state. I mean, these are the things that come to mind about this.
In my reading of other contexts, it's really interesting that you say that, because there was a very established kind of do-it-yourself harm reduction culture within the rave scene back in the 90s, in the early 90s. And so people looked after each other. It was quite small communities as well. So knowledge could be passed on through, people would be essentially self-regulating through these kinds of communities. Whereas, as electronic dance music became more commercial, and then other kind of venues got involved, and then later on festivals and so on. As you said, these venues are not properly regulated, so you could extend the kind of darkness metaphor to the fact that that there is kind of like illicit stuff going on, and it's all kind of gray. There's probably a little bit of corruption going on. So I think that, but then at the same time, the community lost the power to self-regulate, to kind of implement those kind of old school, do it yourself, and informed ways of looking out for each other and looking after each other. And I think that's something that has been observed across scenes in different countries as well. But anyway, Neil, Mark, please come in, interrupt me.
I want to add what Edwin and Tina were saying before. I think the first thing we should address in Malta is educating people the difference between recreational drugs and hard drugs. A lot of people who are out of the scene don't distinguish between what is a hard drug and what is a recreational drug. And what I want to add as well is that what Tina said, that they always get these dark, dingy places, scary stuff. They never get the vibe, the feeling, the community when you are in an electronic event. It's the feeling is you belong to something. I can say I've attended obviously electronic events and sometimes even mainstream events. When a mainstream event, it's as it is, it's mainstream. There's no sense of belonging. But when it's an electronic event, there's a I love house music, I love techno music, I love acid. It's more of I forgot. It's like a community, everyone knows each other, everyone is happy. Yes, unfortunately, there is substance abuse, but this has been going on since way, 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 way back. But I think it the education should be, first of all, teaching people to distinguish what is a hard drug and what is a recreational drug. That's the thing. And unfortunately, the stigma in Malta is we are such a small island, everyone knows each other. So if you do something, everyone will jump on you, or everyone knows what you did.
To add to that as well, I mean, here in Malta, how I see it, it's sometimes people that are in our close community, let's say, they don't really care about this stuff, as in they don't really point their fingers at anyone. And this is something that slowly, how I see it, going along with the new generations coming in, it's slowly improving. However, there still needs to be a push from the government to educate more. And the big point I see around it is to educate people to differentiate between the limits, because of course, I mean, trying to maybe do a small analogy. I'm a person that likes a lot of speed. I mean, I trained in a lot of speed situations, and if you're not careful and you don't know your limits, speed can kill you. And just the same with substances. With speed, you have like that rush feeling of adrenaline, and so can do with you do with certain substances. But when people just cut off a line between a substance and doesn't differentiate between the two, that's where sort of the taboo starts to expand, and the people start to get pulled back. And I believe sort of the government, apart from what Edwin said, like putting all the safety measures in place and making sure they are actually enforced, I think there has to be a basis of proper education first, because that's the first thing that has to happen. And unfortunately, in Malta, apart from Karen's blogs, for example, I haven't seen anything really that um, highlights in any way these kind of sort of discussions, or even tries to instigate any of these discussions.
See, Karen, this
What
is
I want to add,
pioneering.
uh,
Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
what I want to add is the health and safety part. It is enforced in a way, but being we are passing to the COVID times, it's already a conundrum to do an event. So yes, there's a structure. It depends. For example, it depends on the number of people you have at the event. But for example, large scale events, you need an ambulance, doctor, whatever. It's a full on. Believe me, it's a it's a nightmare. And the smaller events, if it's in a licensed club, then you don't need any. I mean, the club should be by on its own right adhering to the health and safety bylaw.
And then into that, then the thing is, I mean, how I see it, let's say I'm not a big fan of these mainstream events. As in, the more people there are in an event, for me, it's a bit of a drawback. Let's say what I see happening, small events, as small as they are, there still may be a fraction of people that are abusing like they are doing on other large scale events. And although this is something that you should see safety measures in place from all, maybe most of the clubs I played here in Malta, I barely seen anything actually in place that literally had, a backup plan, or had like some sort of information that ever passed on to the public. And that thing, I believe, is still slightly missing, because on the other hand, like Edwin was saying, lic- a licensed club should have all these measures in place. But if a club is not licensed, you can just not care about these safety measures, because you don't need to have all these safety measures in place if you're operating a bar. So this is, I believe, where the loophole is, and this is where the people should, I mean, the ravers should be safeguarded more.
On that point, just another small point, like I'd also want to differentiate between the difference of having an ambulance and like medical staff from like governmental hospital, whatever, or like ambulances, which might be charity ambulances, and having a place which is like a safe space. If you get too bad, you're taking something, you feel like you're not handling it too well, you wouldn't want to go to an ambulance. I'll give you a quick example. This was a mainstream event. I remember I had gone to I Love MTV when it was like, I was around 14 maybe. And basically I passed out and ended up in one of these ambulances. And the first thing they did was take us a blood sample, and they were like, you took something. What did you take? There's something in your blood sample. And I was, we're gonna tell your father, because at that case, it was like they knew my dad. And I was like, whoa, I just passed out, what's happening? I hadn't taken anything. But you know, there's this difference in attitude between going somewhere to feel safe because you're feeling overwhelmed because you took something, and not going to an ambulance. I mean, this could literally be a life and death scenario because you could have been helped safely with someone who's understanding. So I've been to events abroad and I've seen like little huts with hearts, and they look like they've come out of a rainbow bubble, and they're like, we're here if you feel too fucked or something, you know. So even the way, again, that these things are represented could be a crucial thing. So yeah, I mean, that's a really important difference, I feel.
Can you
If I,
can you imagine
oh,
ethically how what an experience this was? So first and foremost, the element of privacy. You know, when someone goes to us for medical help and they threaten to report someone to their own parents, in itself, the ethics behind that is massively wrong. I mean, even from a privacy perspective, let alone let alone someone who then remains with the stigma that if anything happens, and you might need medical help, and you would stay. I'd rather stay away from this. So this is a great storytelling thing. I hope these things have improved from that time.
Well, I mean, I had a very similar experience when I was young, and I was trying to get into a gig. I was 13 or 14. They found a tiny bit of hashish in my bra. I mean, they didn't find it. I went in, the dog started barking. The police was like, "You there." They took me, they put me to the side, and then they were like, "Do you have any drugs on you?" And I was like, "No, I don't have anything. I just have this." And I took out this like little piece of hashish that was in my bra. And I was like, literally the very first time I ever bought any drugs. And I was like really tentative and terrified, and I wasn't experienced at all. And then they were like, "We're going to call your parents. You're not coming in." And I was like, "Please don't call my parents." I was like literally in floods of tears. And then, they took me out again, and then threw the dogs and the police again. And then that, like, after this whole shenanigan, they were like, "Okay, we'll let you go." And I was like, "Thank you, thank you." And then I ended up, for the rest of the night, instead of watching the gig and having a good time, I was like literally sick because of the shock to the system of that experience. So, I can very much relate to, having these experiences. It doesn't deter people from potentially taking drugs. It doesn't make any difference to, it's just traumatizing is what it is. It doesn't make any difference to, doesn't mean that people are going to engage in like safer behaviors. Doesn't mean that people are going to have a better understanding about the consequences of their behaviors. None of that at all. So, and
yeah,
yeah.
if I may add something, please. I find this discussion very interesting, and I think unfortunately, although having an ambulance and medical assistance is important, unfortunately, I think that they are not trained to deal with anything else except an overdose. So if there is a fatal overdose, yes, because it's a medical issue. But anything else before that, so if a person is feeling overwhelmed, if a person is, not really responsive in a way, but still not a medical emergency, then there's no assistance, and this is unfortunately, I think, a bit dangerous, especially with for example, how Tina was recounting the experience, especially if maybe someone resulted positive or admitted to substance use, and then they involve the police, and then things unfortunately escalate, especially if the person is under the age of 18, where obviously the police will have to be the parents will have to be informed immediately. I find very interesting the fact that you mention education a lot throughout these few minutes. And I think when we speak about substance use, especially in Malta, we experts tend to speak about substance abuse and do not differentiate between use and abuse. And as Mark said, even the fact that there are hard drugs although that is a bit debatable, and recreational drugs, I think the biggest problem is that we do not speak about substance use and substance misuse. It's all abuse, and there's no real distinction. And when it comes to education, that's why harm reduction is important. And a lot of things that you mentioned, how, for example, the club should provide certain services, even the things that were mentioned by the participants that were interviewed by myself and Julia, mentioned that there seems to be a missing link. So there's prevention, but then there's treatment, but in the middle there's practically nothing. And they also, for example, mentioned drug testing at festivals, the availability of free water, which are in reality basic measures which could save lives and maybe also reduce a little bit the stigma. The idea to have small tents which are like a safe zone is very interesting, and I've seen it work. But unfortunately, if you have undercover police roaming around, and then people might think it's a trap, and they will probably not visit the tent. If I may ask a question, please, maybe I don't know if anyone would like to jump in. There seems to be, apart from media stigma, also the way certain segments of society look at the scene, particularly maybe how the authorities also react to electronic music events. Some of the participants, in fact, participants that come from the industry mentioned that DJs have to go through a background check through the police before they can play at the venue, and this is not done for other artists. And I wanted to ask you, especially since you've been quite a while playing or attending these events, what are your views about the relationship between perceptions of electronic music and how authorities react to electronic music, but also to maybe requests to organize certain events in certain areas which are usually not linked to this type of music?
I think this thing has been going on for forever now. I mean, how I see it, there is. I mean, I know people that have been refused to be booked in an event because, like Edwin said, they had a case about a personal use thing of years ago. So that said as well, it seems like, unfortunately, not just with substances and all this stuff we're mentioning here, even other stuff, it seems like electronic music sometimes is always the last to be noticed. There has been a lot. I mean, if we compare this sort of, because to me it is simple straight discrimination. I mean, if you ask a police conduct for an electronic artist or a DJ, you should ask all the performers of the festival and not just pick one side of the performance. So if this stuff is not going to change, and even during this COVID times, for example, there were measures put in place for singers and for musicians, but not for DJs and electronic music artists. So this discrimination, like I said before, and I think I'll keep on repeating this, I think that can only be fixed by education and educating not just the people, but I mean the people around us, but the people who are sort of uh, doing the laws and everything. So something something like this, I believe there is still a lot of work to be done, and hopefully along the generations this will continue improving, because it is improving. The stuff is now sort of being more avoided with certain with promoters, you know, I mean, or even with the government, because with the power of social media, people would really slam, you know, like for once, I remember it, and this happened when social media wasn't even this big. I mean, if this happened today, I'm pretty sure all the media outlets would have put an article stating that an electronic artist has was not allowed to play at a festival because he was found in possession of a very small amount of drugs about 10 years ago. I mean, people would literally go ballistic. So I think the help of social media now is also trying to help the people at least not thinking about and doing this stuff. So it is improving, but there still needs to be more education to solidify sort of these fundamentals.
I mean, it looked very promising a couple of years ago when a prominent, I would say DJ, part of a duo that was very popular abroad, made a big fuss about this thing of the police conduct, which to a certain I fail to understand the reason behind, irrespective of all the logic they try to like. Um, it's completely logical, completely discriminatory. It goes against the art. Can you imagine Johnny Cash not being able to, like perform anywhere? Can you imagine John Lennon? Can you imagine all the artists who boasted of having composed masterpieces under the effect of substance, not being then allowed to perform? Because if you take that logic, you know, I mean, it's easy to say then you have to either apply it to everything blanket wise, or nothing. So there was so I think that honestly speaking, there a lot is being mentioned about the reform of the police force in Malta, making it becoming more professional, and this is one aspect that needs to be really tackled. The aspect of how the police, it's like how news is delivered. You need to know how to deliver news, how to tackle a substance user, rather than making that substance user, like it's the way you speak, the way you approach yourself. I mean, it could be even beneficial if they are investigating and what just to approach you, because the moment that you commit yourself that someone is doing something horrible when they aren't, that might affect them permanently, especially if they are at a young age. So so I think it's easiest to say they should be trained in this and that, and we all know that it's hard to train, hundreds of officials to be all of ethically good, like substance and mindfully. But I mean, as Neil is saying, it's up to us to take a stand and to try to try to change, and try to instill change, and try to convince that things need to be tackled differently. I mean, um, there's not we're at the age of Black Lives Matter, so we are supposedly now we are all around it, trying to be more inclusive and trying not to put stigma, and Black Lives matters in everything. So diversity is not diversity in color, but diversity in even forms of art or in styles of life. So I think the way forward for society to evolve is definitely improving these the way these things are being tackled. The stigma that is immediately, like by simply, if asking for police conduct for an event that has to do with electronic music, as in contrast to an event that has to do with, like the band, the village band club, or the village feast, in which we all know massive substance abuse takes place especially during the parades. I
And
mean,
the police is okay with people drinking and then fighting, I suppose, because
and
that tends
drinking
to
and,
happen.
and fighting, and that's drug abuse, because that's
Yeah,
alcohol is a drug. We all know
of
that alcohol
course. Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
a drug. So okay, so I mean, we are trying to label a drug against another. What's happening here? The issue is how uncontrollable the person is, and it's great to look at the culture of the raves when they appeared after the Cold War. They were like a unifying culture. It's like the rebirth of the hippie movement. And as we're saying, I think Mark was saying, it was like culture of friendship, and the culture of common good, you know, rather nowadays. I mean, this has died away. We all know. We are back to times when there's unemployment, where there are protests in the streets. So to a certain extent, that was the ideal culture to live in. The culture of where people makes friends, where people meet together and are joined together by music, you know, rather than there's division, there's racism, there's I don't know, unrest towards immigration and all that stuff. So I mean, let's hope that we are living in times that